I was mentioning last week and as well yesterday that this has been designated National School Choice Week, not only across the country, but in Idaho as well. Governor Butch Otter making the proclamation several days ago. This is an issue that is near and dear to a great many people in this day and age because they're disappointed, obviously, with a lot of the work that's being done in government schools and a lack of competition, and perhaps they think that students' achievement could be a little bit higher. And so this week, today and tomorrow, we're going to have guests talking with us about this topic. I will quickly point out Steve Millington is scheduled to join us as well at 8:30 this morning. He's the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. He's going to be talking about some other legislative actions that are currently going on in Boise, including some of the rash of recent retirements. But in the meantime, I'd like to welcome our guest, Terry Ryan. He is the CEO of Idaho Charter School Network, joining us this morning talking about School Choice Week and some of the legislative efforts that are going on at the state capitol. First of all, sir, welcome to our program.
Well, thank you. It's a joy to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity.
It is going to be, I would assume, a very busy week. A lot of people burning shoe leather at the Capitol on this topic.
Yes, indeed. There's a lot going on, both in terms of what I'd call public school choice, so charter school efforts to make the more opportunities for students and families in that space. But then also in the private school choice arena, there's conversations going on, and hopefully this is the year that a bill will be presented to create a tax credit program that would allow parents to have more choices for their children to go to private schools of their choice. So there are things happening, and I would encourage everybody listening to this show to reach out to your lawmakers and say, hey, it's time to grow school choice in Idaho, and it shouldn't be just curtailed to the public school choices, things like charters and magnet schools, but it's something that the private schools should be a part of as well.
Is it safe to say that in Idaho we're at least ahead, perhaps, of other states in this arena?
No, behind. We're ahead in the public school choice. I'd say we're at a good spot in the public school choice. So you have districts that offer open enrollment, so kids can enroll from outside their districts. You have charter schools. You have 52 charter schools here, serving about 22,000 students. You've got magnet schools, especially in the larger districts. But when it comes to private school choice, this state's actually far behind, and mainly that's because of the Blaine Amendment issue here, and just a general sort of feeling that the first private school choice bill was offered up in Idaho in 1994, and nothing has happened on that front since then. And so, quite frankly, Idaho's behind when it comes to giving parents a choice to have their students go to a private school using taxpayer dollars to follow them to that school.
Now, speaking, I guess, as I might be described as a papist, that Blaine Amendment would seem to be a little bit outdated in this day and age.
Yeah, it goes back to, Blaine was the Speaker of the House in the 1870s, early 1880s. It was initially going to be a federal amendment to the Constitution. That failed. So as states were being brought into the Union, out west in particular, this was part of the deal that if you wanted to be part of the Union, there was pressure on you to embrace the Blaine Amendment. It's been around for over 100 years. I agree. And, you could make the argument that it really was anti-Catholic, anti-Irish, anti-Eastern European immigrants.
We obviously are living in a much different time, and I think that we could safely say the conversation going on between two men descended from the Irish today is obvious that things have changed and we found other opportunities. But I had a conversation some years ago with a friend, and he explained to me that this is what always gets me about this. The people who make choices to send their children to a private or a parochial school, they're paying twice because you pay school taxes in most places in the country, but you don't get a break if you want to send your kids to make that choice. So he had to work the overnight shift in a postal sorting plant. He did it for 43 years so he could pay the tab to send his kids to parochial school. And it seems to me that that burden is a little on the unnecessary side.
Well, my parents did that for me and my three siblings. The reality is, though, that it used to be cheaper to send your children to, say, Catholic schools because you had a lot more nuns and priests who were doing that work I don't want to say for free, but they weren't making market wages. It's harder now for a lot of the religious schools because they don't have as much of the priests, the nuns, and those sorts of things. So they're using laity, and they have to pay market wages. So that's the cost of tuition has gone up as a result. So it's made it even harder on families to send their kids to the private schools that they might really want their kids to go to, and so they accept what they get.
Our guest today is Terry Ryan, and he's joining us. He's the CEO of Idaho Charter School Network, and spending some time with us talking about School Choice Week and some of the lobbying efforts that are taking place in Boise. And you referenced charter schools. The record of charter schools across the country, everything I have read, I can read the op-ed pages of both liberal newspapers and conservative newspapers, and they all sing the praises of charter schools. But gosh, the struggle you have dealing with a lot of people, I suspect a lot of it comes from the power of the teachers union in government schools. The struggles across the country are monumental.
Well, that's true. It's difficult, and it's an uphill climb. In Idaho, some of the highest performing schools are indeed charter schools. You've got a really good one down there in Twin Falls and Xavier, and they have wait lists, and a number of them are trying to grow. And so really the issue for the charters in this state is the issue of flexibility around things like staffing, use of dollars, those sorts of things. The idea that charters are supposed to be laboratories of innovation and are allowed to do things in very different ways. The margins here for really being different in the charter space is not as great as I think a lot of the school leaders and others would want it to be. And by the way, I think traditional district schools would like to have more flexibilities in how they operate also. That's probably a conversation for another day.
And I've been hearing about this since the Reagan years, so I'm getting to the point where, well, number one, they'd say I'm old, but 35 years we've been hearing about possibility of a voucher program, which would simply eliminate all of these concerns and let parents nationwide, statewide, all choose where their children are going to school. Is that anywhere? Do you think it's anywhere near closer now than it was a generation ago?
In states like Arizona, it's happening. In states like Florida, it's getting pretty close to being that way. In Indiana, it's starting to move seriously in that direction. A lot of states, no, it's not happening. And Idaho is definitely in the back of the pack in terms of that sort of educational, the idea of an educational debit card, that basically you have an educational debit card that allows you to get the services you think are most appropriate for your child, the education you think is most appropriate for your child. That's still largely an idea across most of the country, but there are some states that are a lot further ahead in this space. I'd say look at Arizona. They're the furthest along.
I can remember years ago seeing a 60 Minutes story. This was probably in the 90s. And it was a woman who was running a charter school in the inner city somewhere east of the Mississippi. I don't even remember the city now. But her young students, most of whom were probably middle school age, they could sit down and recite Geoffrey Chaucer, which, when I was a senior in high school, we had about half a year in a government school on British literature, and most of the children were sleeping through that at the time. But it shows you there is obvious concrete evidence out there that this works, and that if we want to bring people out of poverty, it should be done. What's the resistance?
I think you got a number of resistance points in that. One, just the idea that charter schools are public schools and should be doing that work. There are still those, especially in the teacher union ranks, who that just rankle. I think then there's cultural resistance here in terms of you don't have agreement, especially in the big cities, that the classical education is the best thing for students. It's interesting that there's a group here in Fruitland that's opening a classical charter school and has recruited an outstanding retired military officer to run it. So this definitely is a conversation that's happening both in the cities and I would argue in the rural space as well. But you run into barriers around just the idea of charters and opening a charter and getting a facility and all that goes into that. You run into cultural issues of, well, gosh, that's the white guy's history, and so there's a lot of issues that pop up when you start getting into this space.
I just read a story last week. There's a community college in Bronx, New York, where the students initially balked at the idea that they would learn about these great dead white philosophers. now that they've actually been learning about them at this particular college, which is unique, I guess, as colleges go, they've discovered that a lot of these people were teaching universal truths. That seems to me that they've, at least in some places, overcome that hurdle of cultural issues.
Right, and it takes brave school leaders to do it, but it's definitely happening.
Our
And it's a
guest,
good thing. It's a good thing. Listen, being exposed to core knowledge, core ideas about the West is powerful stuff. I think you can mix that also with an appreciation of what's going on in the rest of the world and how a lot of those values and beliefs actually interconnect. That you can find connectivity in this stuff, and I think that's what great educators do.
our guest is Terry Ryan, and I just wanted to point out to people we're at 8:16. He's going to be joining us for this half hour. Then he's got to run because they're doing a lot of efforts this week on the Hill, Capitol Hill here in Boise, in Idaho. This is also part of a nationwide effort this week. 17 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you as well. 22 right now on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Before we went on the air, I mentioned a piece I saw at Washington Examiner from a Corey DeAngelis at the Cato Institute, and they did 21 experimental evaluations. They found that in 19 of these, private school choice programs lead to student achievement levels that are on par with or generally higher than they would have been in government schools. And then they also brought in all sorts of research and data on how this will increase the earning power for students when they're adults, how we could raise test scores by a whopping 14% in mathematics. This reading this is just mind-boggling. When you see this, how can you better make some legislators understand that this is the route to go?
Well, I think that you just need to get them to understand it's not that risky. That not only does the evidence that you quote back it up, the fact is that most parents and families in Idaho and across the country want to pick the schools that they think work best for their children. And it's fascinating to talk to families, and my own family, where you have 2 or 3 students, and they each might have a different learning style and fit better into one school over the other. The idea that we should all go to the same sorts of schools, I think people have gotten past that. The issue becomes one of control of money, control of resources, and that's where the adult interests collide with the interest of families and kids. So I just think you got to say straight up, this is about our kids, this is about our families, this is about the future, and we want what works best for our kids, and we want to give them the best opportunities possible. And that's the messaging that I think needs to go here, and people need to stand up and say it.
Can you stick around for a few more minutes?
Sure.
I've got a break we've got to get to, and then we have about 5 more minutes left following the break before 8:30 this morning. I just wanted to mention our guest right now is Terry Ryan, and he's joining us. We're talking about National School Choice Week, and he is the CEO of the Idaho Charter School Network. Also wanted to mention very quickly for those folks who are listening just before the break, we're at 22 right now at 8:20, and if you're struggling with your hearing, please give a call to Dr. Christine Pickup at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. Why? Trust. As a certified audiologist and independent business owner, Dr. Pickup will never use deceptive advertising to sell a hearing aid. No bait and switch, no seeking participants to try a type of aid. At Mount Harrison Audiology, you'll be offered your choice of brands with recommendations based on your hearing and your goals. Local and independent, you can trust Dr. Pickup with your hearing and your budget as well, we should point out. Call to schedule your appointment today, 208-312-0957. We've got more coming up in just a couple of minutes on National School Choice Week, including school choice in Idaho. Our guest is joining us this morning, and he is the CEO of the Idaho Charter School Network, Terry Ryan, and we're talking about School Choice Week, and there's a lot going on legislatively in Boise as concerned parents from across the state of Idaho try to make some impression to expand school choice, make an impression on our legislators. And Mr. Ryan, first of all, wanted to point out we've got a few more minutes with you, and I know that this is not always easy work that you're doing, and we thank you for doing it. But you do find, I'm sure, when you're dealing directly with these people, that there's at least a group of legislators who are more than willing to sit down and hear you out.
Absolutely. There's a school choice caucus made up of both House members and Senate members, and they gather and talk about ways of improving the school choice environment. in Idaho, and I again encourage your listeners and others who care about this to speak to lawmakers and say this matters to us. Why do we not have? Why do other states, like 26 states, have programs like tax credits and vouchers, and why isn't Idaho one of those states? And what can we do to move that conversation, and not only the conversation but legislation in this state? Because the fact of the matter is that the folks who work in the school space protect their interests, and that's just there's nothing wrong with that. That's the way it works. But if you want to see change, you got to get out and you got to ask for it, and you got to push for it, and you have to encourage it, and you got to say to lawmakers, this matters to us. And so I'd say that's the big takeaway about this school choice week is if you believe in this stuff, get out and let your lawmakers know that this is important to you, it's important to your families, it's important to your kids, to your grandchildren. That would be the message that they want to hear.
Sometimes it's difficult, though, I think, to overcome bureaucracy, and I'll share a short story. 15 years ago, I was working in a pretty large city back on the east side of the country, and one of my closest friends in town happened to be the man who ran the city's legal department. And he and his wife had 8 kids at the time. She was homeschooling a great many of them. She had to call the school district one day to get some details on testing materials. The fellow on the other end didn't know who he was talking to and insulted her on the telephone. So there's a lot you have to overcome in this because people somehow believe, especially with the homeschoolers, that there's something weird about what you're doing.
Well, it's definitely hard to get people to reconceptualize what they think about education and to get them to understand that really what we need to care about are how are the kids doing. Are these educational options working well for them? Fact of the matter is that the traditional public schools do work well for a number of kids. I would argue that. But there are other kids that it's not working for, and they deserve opportunities that work better for them. And it's in all of our interest as taxpayers and others to have that. The best thing for our young people is to be able to leave high school and get a job or go on to higher ed and be productive members of society. That benefits all of us, especially old guys like you and I who need them to pay for our pensions, right? So, I mean, I don't see this I see this as actually an argument for, dare I say, a better society, one where we're maximizing the potential of all our kids and empowering families to make choices for their kids. I mean, that's red, white, and blue America, isn't it?
It is. I'm going to try to squeeze a caller in here, and caller, keep it brief. We're down to just about 3 minutes. Your question for our guest. Go ahead.
Yes, I think charter schools are a great idea. Some of my kids actually attend one. What do you think about charter schools who use strict screening to determine if your child is qualified to attend, if they fit the mold of your school? And does this seem to act like a private school to determine who is good enough for your school? And then lastly, can this become a discrimination issue? And I'll just listen on the radio. Thank you.
Yeah, so to be clear, it's illegal for charter schools to have a strict screening process. They are public schools, and they have to enroll the students that apply. I think it's fair for charter schools to have conversations with families saying this is what we're about, here's how we operate, and here are the values that we believe in, and do you want to be a part of our community? So I don't think that's screening. I think that's just being clear to families what the school is. I think great magnet schools and school districts do that as well. And so that is part of school choice, is that you actually know the choice that you're trying to become a part of. That said, again, that if they're screening families and screening kids and saying you're not welcome here, you can file a lawsuit.
Of course, a lot of other schools that would be options, and I'm thinking mainly of, and there's a number of religious schools, faith-based schools in the Twin Falls area, for instance. They're willing to bring everybody in because they feel that it's part of a mission and that they're going to help form these young people. So again, the choices are out there; they're just not always easy.
And there's a culture fit, I'd describe it. You know, I have one kid who's really into sports and another who isn't. So a sports program in the school matters to one, it doesn't to the other. So, I mean, this is where I would encourage parents to really take to heart what they think works and is most appropriate for their child and try to find it. I mean, that's the future of education. That's now, where you're basically able to custom fit a lot of the educational experience for your children, not only in a brick and mortar school, but through online opportunities like Khan Academy or an online school. This is all evolving pretty quickly. It's a great opportunity for parents, but it's also more responsibility falling on parents to make choices and decisions that really do work best for their kids.
Terry, Ryan, we've got about 20 seconds left. For people who'd like to know more, is there a website you could send them to?
Yes, you can check out our website. There's one on the Idaho Charter School Network. Just type that into Google, and you can see what's going on there. We have a school choice booklet, both in English and Spanish, that kind of explains what your choices and options are, what's the difference between a magnet school and a charter school, and that sort of thing. And then, there are national groups you can type in. Type in National School Choice Week into Google or any browser, and a lot of really good information will pop up for you. That would be my advice to the listeners.
Well, best of luck to you, and hopefully we'll be talking again soon on some successful notes.
Thank you. Take care, sir.
You too. Thank you. Terry Ryan joining us this morning, the CEO from the Idaho Charter School Network. And he mentioned National School Choice Week, one of the guests from Washington, joining us tomorrow morning after 9 o'clock. So if you have questions, save them. We're going to spend perhaps the better part of that hour, 9 o'clock hour, on this subject tomorrow. Steve Millington will join us on Top Story in just a few minutes.